So in the last video, we completed our service layer. And in that video, I said that this service layer is ultimately responsible for calling the repositories. Now, let us start implementing repositories. So what repositories will do? They will create a interface between our service and our database. So for each database table, we will create a entity class and that will be mapped to a database table. And also I will show you how to create migration, how to run migration, and how to revert migration, and what advantage does this migration give us. So we are going to use Postgres database with TypeORM, right? So let us start. So first thing what I have done, I have created a .env file, and here I have added all the database related environment variables, right? DB host, DB port, username, password, and the database name. So for your case, you can change these values accordingly, right? Now coming to the database, if you see here, I have created a database called library. Okay, and it is currently empty. So if you go to schema and table, see there are no tables, right? Even if I refresh, there are no tables, right? So we will create tables from migrations. Now to start with this Postgres and type ORM, what we will do, we will create our first data source. Okay, data source means it will have all the connection related information to our database. So if you see here, I already have a data folder. Inside this folder, what I will do, I'll create a new file and I will name it as pg data source.ts, right? So why I'm storing it in a different folder? Because there is a chance that there might be multiple data sources. So this is pg data source. We might have a mongoose or mongodb related data source. We might have a redis, we might have elasticsearch, right? So all the data configuration information will sit here. So what I will do, of course, it will be an export class, and I'll say app data source. You can name it whatever you want, right? And this should extend from data source, which will come from type ORM, right? Then I will create a constructor, and here I will inject the config service that we created in last video, right? And I will mark this as read only. Okay. And here I will call the super function. What this super will do, the super will call this data source constructor and it will pass the required information. Okay. Now what are the required information? So first information is type. Okay, what type of database, right? So this is going to be a Postgres database, right? Then host. Okay, so from where we will get the host? We'll get the host from config service. Now can I use this .config service? Okay, I cannot use this because this can only be used after super has been called, right? So here I don't have to use this super, so I can simply say config service dot, okay, get what? This is get string, right? And what we will get, so if you see, we will get db host, right? And what will be the default value? So it will be localhost, right? Because if you remember, this value expects a default value, right? Now what else? We need the port, right? So I can say config service dot get, this will be number, right? db port, or it will default to 5432. That is the default port for Postgres, right? Then username. Okay. So similarly, config service dot get string. Okay. I will say db username and the default value will be empty string, right? And now since these are username and password field, be little careful on what you are adding the default value, right? Don't expose even the dummy default value in your code base, right? So config service dot, okay, get string, and I will say db password, okay, and empty value, right? Then database config service dot get string and db name, right? So which is this db name? This database name, right? So I will update it here. And what is the default name? The default name will be library, right? Okay. So these are the basic connection information, but this needs few more information for us to be able to run the migrations. Okay, I'll tell you what that means. But for now, add some more key value pair into this. Okay, so we will have a list of entities, that is an array. So entity is nothing but a class that has few decorators that will come from type ORM. Okay, and they will map to a database table, right? So once we start creating entities, we have to come and add it here, right? Then migrations. So this means where we are going to store our migrations. Okay, I'll explain you what is the migration. Okay, so this will be dir name. That means I'm now inside this PG data source. So this dir name will give me slash data. Right now, what I want to do is I want to have a migration folder in my SRC. Right. So what I have to do, I have to take this current directory. I have to come one step up. Okay. So if I'm in data source, when I come one step up, I'll be inside SRC folder, right? Then I will have a migrations, okay, slash. That means I'll have a migrations folder, okay, and inside that, whatever is there, okay, it could be .ts or .js extension. Use that as your migrations. That means on this SRC, okay, we'll have a migrations folder, and inside that whatever files are created, consider that as migration. Okay, that's what it means. Then synchronization, so I'm going to keep it false. Now what is the meaning of synchronization? So if you keep this true, and you should never keep this true in production. So if it is true, what will happen? It will synchronize your code and your database. That means if you change anything in your entity and you save it, it will be immediately reflected into the database, right? But we don't want that. We want to go through the route of migrations. Okay, so I'm keeping synchronization false. Maybe if you want, you can keep this true in your dev environment and just see how it behaves. Okay, and logging. Okay, logging, I'm keeping it as true. So what this will log? So these are entities, right? We are not going to write directly any SQL statement. So this will print us the SQL statement that this ORM frameworks internally runs. Okay, so this is usually handy when we are doing the development or any debugging to see what queries are being run and to see if there are any performance or any indexation issue or anything, if you want to debug on that, right? Now what we will do, export default. Okay, now we have to do one more thing. This app data source, we have to make it part of our DI container, right? So what I will do, I will say service. So once I add this service decorator, this app data source is now available in my dependency injection container, and later I'm going to use this app data source to generate repositories for me. Okay, and these repositories will have all the CRUD operations like find all, create, update, and delete. Like those operations are available. Okay, so now what I can do, export default. Okay, container dot get, okay, app data source, not app data source, right? So I'm adding it to the container, and I'm exporting an instance of the container. Okay, we have our data source configuration completed. Right now what we have to do, we have to inject it into our app.ts, right? So that on the startup, okay, it will run this function. So where we will add this, so first let's add a method. Okay, private initialize data source. Okay, and we have this app data source which is available in our DI container. So what we can do, we can inject it, right? Private read only, okay, data source of type app data source. Okay, now here I will add a try catch block. Okay, and on try, what I can do, await this dot, and if you see here I'm using await, so I should use async. Okay, so I'll say private async. Okay, this dot data source dot initialize. So what this will do, this will initialize the connection for me, right? And below that I can say console dot log database connected successfully, right? Successfully. Okay, and if there are any exception, Okay, I'll say console.log and I'll say failed to connect to DB, and console.log will say the error message will try to print. Okay, and what we can do, process.exit with a one status code, right? That means this process exited abruptly, right? If it was 0, that means this process ended gracefully or after completing its required task, right? Now, since connecting to the database is a very important functionality and our app won't work if it is not connected to the database, so that is a good idea to exit the process here itself, right? Now, where I should call this? I should call this on the start method, right? So I'll mark it as async and I will add a console.log, and here I can say connecting to database dot dot dot. Okay, and await this dot initialize data source, right? So it will say connecting, then it will come here. Okay, if it fails, process will exit. Okay, if it doesn't fail, it will read the port number and it will start listening on the particular port, right? Okay, so let us save this one. Let us come to terminal and see what is the status. So if you see, database connected successfully and server is running on port 8000. So we are able to connect to our database successfully. Now, next thing what we will do, let us create our first entity. Okay, so we have a book entity, right? So if you see the create book, okay, what value it expects? Okay, so it expects title, description, ISBN, price, and pages. Okay, so we'll create entities, okay, which has similar properties in the class as this JSON, but we'll add one more property, that is the ID field, right? So let us come to our VS Code, and here on book, okay, we have controller, we have service. Here I will add one more file and call it as book.entity.ts. Okay, so here what I will say, export, okay, class book, okay, and very important, this extends base entity. Okay, this base entity will come from TypeORM, and this is all the magic that will do, that will convert this regular class into a entity class, right? So I will say ID, okay, of type number, and what else we have, title of type string, we have description of type string, and we have ISBN, which is of again type string, we have price, which is of type number, and we have pages, and this is also going to be of type number. Okay, so I have created the book entity. Now, is this enough? Does this define a entity? So the answer is no. Why not? Because we have to use few more decorators, okay, to explain it to the type ORM that how this book entity is going to behave. Okay, so first what we have to do, we have to decorate this with the entity decorator. Okay, that means this book, okay, is now an entity. Okay, now we can pass a value, that what will be the table name corresponding to this entity. Okay, so we'll say books. Okay, now you might ask, is type ORM not smart enough to convert this book into this books plural string, right? So sometimes it will do. Okay, for example, it is book, so it will convert it to books table, right? But say for example we have city, right? So what we want, we want cities like this. Okay, but type ORM, what this will do, it will do like this, cities, right? So we have an option here to specify the table name corresponding to this entity. Okay, or whatever name you want, right? You can say, you can give your company name, right? So library underscore books, right? So you can do it like this also, whatever you want. Okay, now this ID, okay, it is supposed to be the primary key, right? Now how can we define it as a primary key? So I can say add primary generated column, right? So now this will treat this as a primary key. Okay. So let me take some space so that it will be easy to explain. Okay. Now this title. Title is what? Title is nothing but a column, right? And what about description? This is also going to be a column, right? And ISBN, okay, column, and you can pass certain properties to this. Okay, so one property I want to use here is unique true. That means in my database, I don't want to have two books with the same ISBN, right? That violates the purpose of having a ISBN, right? So this is going to be a unique key. So you can pass such properties or the configuration properties here, right? At this is also going to be a column, okay, and here I will say decimal, right? And here also I can say column, okay, and type of int, right? So pages will be integer, price will be decimal, okay, ISBN is going to be unique. So by default this is string, right? So I don't have to do it like this, right? So it is by default considered as string. Okay. Okay. Now our book entity is completed. Now our entity is created. Then what we will do? If you remember, in this data source, we have this entities array, right? So here we will add this book entity. Now we will come to this book entity and let us discuss about migrations. So we have to generate a migration. Okay, what is a migration? So migration is nothing but a SQL statement, okay, that has a up and a down function. Okay, so whatever changes we are doing in our code, be it creating a entity or be it updating a column or be it changing a column type, any modification or creation in our code, okay, ultimately it has to be done as a SQL statement in our database, right? So here if I'm creating a book, it should be a create book statement in the database, right? So to create that particular SQL statement, we create a migration. This migration will have the SQL statement inside that, and when I run the migration, it will check the database. It will automatically knows what migrations have already run and where and which migration have not run, and it will take those migrations, essentially the SQL statement, and it will execute in the database, right? That means we don't have to go to the database and change any columns manually. We will change it in our code. We'll generate a migration out of that, and when the migration is run, okay, the same SQL changes will be done on the database. Okay, now what advantage we get? Say suppose we have done some changes and we created a migration out of that. Now other developers in your team, when they will check out the code or the branch in which you are working, or if you have merged it to main, they will take that branch. They will also have the migrations that we have created. Now all that they have to do is to run the migrations. Now your SQL changes are now versioned, okay, and it can be rolled back and it can be shared with your team through the source control, right? And the same thing can happen on different environments, right? Say for example you are in dev environment and you created few migrations, you ran the migration into the dev database, okay, you checked everything is working. Now you will push that dev to higher branch, okay, let's say main branch. Now in main branch you will have also the same set of migrations. The same set of migrations can be directly run on the main database or your production database. If something goes wrong, you can roll back and run the migration, so it will revert all the changes. So we can version control the SQL statement or the SQL changes that we want to eventually make into our database, plus it will be shared through repository throughout the team members, right? So that's where migration comes into picture. Okay, so how do we generate migration? Okay, so TypeORM gives us the command. Okay, but we are not going to run this command again and again. What we'll do, we will add it in package.json, right? So let me paste it and I will explain you. So here I have three commands. Migration generate. So what this will do, this will generate migration from entity. Okay, then migration up, okay, and migration down. So it has a npx command, and this type ORM exposes this migration run, and from where it will pick the data source from this data source, right? This pg data source, right? That's why we exported this data source, the instance of this particular data source, right? Because this will be used by this migration run command, right? And where how it will know where are the migrations. So here we have already told the ORM that this is where you should look for migrations, right? So we have migration run and we have migration reward. All of this will happen with respect to this data source, right? So wherever this data source is pointing, okay, this host or local host or with the credentials available with this username, it will run these migrations, right? So for now, let us first generate our migration, and then I will show you how the migration look and what we can do next. So I will open a terminal, okay, and here my server is running, okay. I have opened another terminal instance, okay, and here npm run, okay, migration generate dash dash and src, okay, migrations, and we will give it a name, right? So book entity init, that means generate a migration inside src migration, and the name should be book entity init, right? So I will hit enter. So if you see migration, okay, and it has given me a path, so it says src migration and some timestamp, and migration init has been successfully created, right? Has been generated successfully, right? So we will come and see this. So if you see here, we have migrations and we have a book entity init, right? This is the name, and it has a up command and it has a down command, right? So what is this up command? So this has the create statement, right? Create table book id title and every other field, okay, that I have added in the entity, okay, that has come here. And if you see unique isbn, right, because I have added the isbn as a unique column, right? So we have this command, right? Okay, so now migration is generated. So what next? So now if you see the table, okay, we don't have anything. Even if I do a refresh, I don't have anything. I don't have anything, right? So now I will come here. I will clear this and I will say npm run migration up. Okay. So if you see, it will compare the current schema and it will do some validation, and it will create a transaction, and it will run the create book statement, that is the up statement, right? And it will say executed successfully. This migration has been executed successfully, right? So now let us come to our database and we will do a refresh. So after doing a refresh, you will see the books table is created and another table called migrations is created, okay. So if I show you, select star from migrations, okay. So if you see, it has the timestamp in which the migration name that has been created, right? So what this table does, it keeps the track of all the migrations that has been run and that is yet to run, right? So when you say npm run migration, it will check from this table which migrations have already run and which are yet to be run, right? So now if you see the book, okay, columns, you can see all the columns that were created, right? This is coming directly from our entity, okay. Now if you run, okay, down, what will happen? It will drop that particular table, right? So now if I come here and if I refresh, okay, what will happen? Only migrations table is pending, okay, and the books table is gone, right? Now if I run this one, see, it has reverted the migrations table also, right? Now a word of caution, you should never directly add any statement or update any statement in the migrations table. And similarly, you should not update anything manually on this migrations folder. Okay, don't run anything here. If you want to update something, you update the entity and generate another migration. Okay, let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so here let me run this command again, the migration up. Okay, let me have the database. Okay, then say you want to update something. Okay, so here you want to have the author name also. Okay, so column. Okay, and author name, and this is going to be of type string. Right now you should not come and update anything here on this migration. Okay, what you should do instead is you should generate one more migration. Okay, so clear, and so this is the migration. Okay, book, and you have to give a name, right? So entity update author name, right? And before I run this migration or create this migration, so here let me refresh. Okay, so now we have the books field back, and here if you see the columns, what we have: id, title, description, isbn, price, and pages, right? And let me show you the migration. We have one migration here, right? So I will come here and generate another migration. Okay, so if you see this folder, this is the entity in it. Okay, here what we have done, we have created this migration, right, with the update author name. So what it is doing, it is doing alter table. Okay, add author name, right? And we have the down option also, right? Now what we have to do, we have to take this migration. Okay, and we'll say migration up. Okay, so it will run that particular SQL statement for me, right? Now if you come to database and if you do a refresh, you see now you are getting author name, right? And if you check the migrations, it will tell you which migration has been executed, right? So every time you have to update something, update in the entity, generate a migration, and run the migration. Right now, similarly, if your fellow developers they want, okay, they will take a, so ultimately you will commit this to a repository, right? So they will take a pull. Okay, they will have n number of migrations. Now they don't have to generate. Okay, you have already generated, and you have to, and we have pushed the migrations folder, right? Other developers or in other environments, what we have to do, we have to just we have to run this migration up. Okay, now our database is ready with migration, and we have our entity created, right? Now let us go to our service. So in service, if you see, we are using this constant data point, right? So now we will not use this one. What we will do, we will take a instance of that entity, generate a repository out of it, and then do all the CRUD operation on that, right? So let us start that. So here I will take a private instance of the book repository. Okay, so and what will be the type of this one? The type of this one will be repository of type book. Okay, and we have to import this one. Now in the constructor, we will inject the app data source, right? So I'll say private read only app data source of type app data source, right? Now this dot book repository equals to app data source dot get repository of type book. Okay, so what we have done, we have initialized this book repository, and from where we are getting that repository, we are getting that repository from app data's function, that is get repository, and we are passing this book entity. That means this repository function will create a book repository and assign it to this value, right? Now what we will do for get all books, so we will say return, okay, this dot book repository dot find without any condition. Okay, so this will do, this will find all the books. Okay, and what we have to do, we have to mark this function as async. Okay, and let me mark all this function as async before I do any more update. Now what I will do for get book by id, I will say const book, okay, equals to await this dot book repository find one by, okay, an ID, right? So this will find one by this ID, right? If book equals to null, that means this particular ID doesn't exist, right? So I'll say throw new not found error, right? And I'll pass a message book not found. If you want, you can give more details, right? Then if we find the book, then what we will do? We'll simply return the book, as simple as this one, right? Now what we will do for create book, const new book equals to this dot book repository dot create, okay, and create what? The book that we are getting from the request, that is the create book DTO, right? Then return this dot book repository dot save and new book, okay. So we will save this one. We'll create the object. Till now this is in memory, right? This will not go to database. Once we do save, then only it will go to the database and we'll get a response, okay. Now update book, okay. So for update book, these two line we will copy, okay. We'll borrow from the get book by id function, okay. So here I can say current book, okay. And if current book is null, then we'll throw not found exception, okay. Then we will use some simple JavaScript function, okay. Object.assign, okay, current book with the book DTO that I'm getting from this update book DTO, right? Then return this dot book repository dot save and save which book? The current book. Now coming to the delete part, what we will do? We'll say const result equals to await, okay, this dot book repository dot, okay, delete, and it will take the id, okay. So it will delete by this id, okay. And if, okay, result dot affected and result dot affected is greater than 0, that means how many rows were affected because of this delete, right? So if this affected field is available and it is greater than 0, okay, what we will do? We will say return true. That means something has been deleted, right? Else return false. That means we could not delete, right? So this is how we are going to use the basic CRUD functionality in our service layer, okay. And here I should use this dot app data source, okay. Now what we will do next? We will update our controller. So we'll go to controller, okay. And if you see, we are already using this service method from the previous video. So here what we have to do? We have to mark all this function as async, right? So let me quickly do that. Now these are the controller functions, right? And if you remember, we are calling this in our app.ts. So that handler call, that also should be marked as async, right? So what we will do? We will come to app.ts, okay. And here in controllers.for each, I will come to this instance function, right? This is where we are calling our handler with the arguments, right? So here I will just add a await on this, okay, because this is the ultimate controller call, right? So since we have marked our controller as async, right, we have to await on this, right? Now let us open our terminal and see if there are any error. So our server is running properly. Then I'll come to postman, okay, and I will send a request. So if you see, we don't have any book items, right? So what we can do? Let us create a book item. And if you see, we are getting some error, right? So let us check what is that error. So it is saying author name is not provided, right? So what we can do? We can come here and we can say migration down. That author name, okay, that was just an example, right? So I will remove that one, right? So now let me open the database and let me do a refresh. So if you see, the author name is gone, right? And after this, I'll come to my entity and I'll remove this also, right? This is not needed. Then I will come to postman and I'll try to send a request, right? So if you see now the value is properly inserted. That means we are getting 201 created and we are getting a response back. So if you check the database, okay, instead of migrations, let me query the book. So if you see one entry has been created in the database, right? So now if you go to get all books, okay, we will get this book, right? And this book has id 2. So if I come here and add this 2 as the id and send a request, see I'm able to get the value, right? Now I'll copy this one, okay, and I will paste it here, and this should be id 2, okay, and the price and the pages, it is saying 312, right? So let me make it 400, right? This is so this example of update book, right? So now if I send the request, so you will see a bad request. Okay, so what is the problem here? See, if you come to get book by id, the price is coming as a decimal value and this is coming in double quotes. That means it is being treated as string. Okay, so so what this database is doing, it is converting this to string so that it doesn't lose the precision. So for this, we have to do some magic in our entity so that this will be converted to regular floating point value, right? Or the float value, right? So let me show you how to do that. So you come to this column, okay, price column, and here we can say type as decimal, okay, and there is a transform function, okay. So we are going to use this transform function. So it takes a 2, okay, so value from number to value, okay, and from value of type string, okay, so I'll say parse float of value, okay. So from this number, okay, from this number to this parse float value, okay, we are doing this transformation, okay. So now we will come to our database, okay, and we will send another request, right? So if you see now this is coming not as a string but as a proper float value, right? So I will copy this, okay, I will paste it here and I will change this to 400, okay, and what I will do, I will send the request. So if you see now it is changed to 400. So if I do this get book by id, see now it is showing 400. Now what I can do, I can come to delete, okay, and I'll try to delete, okay. So it has successfully deleted 204 no content. And if I come here and send this request, now it is saying not found, right? That means the book is deleted, okay. So now we have successfully completed one round of CRUD operation. So this is it for this video. I hope you learned something new. If you did, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.